Variations in inheritance. We're going to look at incomplete dominance, codominance, and multiple alleles. Incomplete dominance is where when an individual is heterozygous, they're going to be expressing a trait that is intermediate between the two parents or the two versions of that allele. So you can think of these as being blended. And so if you had a feather color gene that was for black and a feather color gene that was for white, if it was inherited and had showed incomplete dominance, then what that means is that you wouldn't have the black feathers and the white feathers separately, or you wouldn't have one or the other, but you'd actually get them blended, and the individual would end up with gray feathers. So with flowers, this can be a way in which the color of the flower is inherited. And so when we do this, what we can show is the colors or the particular traits as a superscript to a letter that denotes the characteristic itself. So if the characteristic is flower color, then this particular individual has 2 alleles for red, and this particular individual has 2 alleles for white. So if this is a trait that shows incomplete dominance, then what we're going to see is that the offspring of the red and the white flower, they will be a pink flower. When a flower has both the red and the white allele, not one of them is dominant over the other, and so essentially the traits get blended, and we see in the blend there a combination between those two traits. If you were then to blend 2 pink flowers, again, one flower would have 1 red allele and 1 white allele, the other flower would have 1 red allele and 1 white allele, and so when they combined, you'd get 25% of the offspring as red. The white alleles would combine and you'd get 25% of the offspring as white, and then you'd have the red and the white combining, and you'd have that happening twice, and so 50% of the offspring would be pink. Codominance is where, again, one of them is not dominant over the other, but instead of blending, both alleles are going to be expressed. And so they are not blended together, instead they are both present, and they both show up in the phenotype. So an example of this is with horse hair color. So you can have a red horse and a white horse, and when they're bred together, the options, so the red horse is going to pass on one of the red genes, and the white horse is going to pass on one of the white hair genes, and when they combine together, and it could be either of the red from the red horse, it could be either of the white alleles from the white horse, but they're going to show up in the individual that gets both the red colored gene and the white colored gene, but this individual isn't going to be red or white because neither one is dominant over the other. They're not going to blend together, which I guess would make it pink and then it'd be a unicorn, and that doesn't happen. Instead, what's going to happen is that they are both going to be co-dominant over each other. So some of the hair is going to be red, some of the hair is going to be white. They are not mixed together, but they are both present at the same time. So we call that a roan horse, where you see it's got some red hair coloring and has some white hair coloring, and sometimes it's evenly distributed or not, but they are both present. So if you were to breed 2 roan horses, again, they could pass on their red hair color gene or their white hair color gene, and so you'd end up with 25% of the offspring ending up with both of the red hair color genes, 25% ending up with both the white hair color genes and being a white horse, or half the time the offspring will get both a red hair color gene and a white hair color gene, and they themselves will be roan horses as well. Multiple allelism is where there's more than 2 alleles possible for a particular characteristic. And so it gives us a larger variety for the genotypes and then also the phenotypes based on that. So eye color is one of these where you have more than 1 gene present, and so this is showing 2 possible genes, an A gene as well as a B gene, of which you could have a dominant recessive version of the A and a dominant and recessive version of the B gene, and depending on how they combine together, we can have all sorts of different combinations of eye color. And so in here we essentially have a mother with brown eyes and a father with brown eyes, But because they are heterozygous for both of these colors, some of their offspring, if they happen to inherit the lower cases only, which is less common but still a possibility, could end up with blue eyes. Or depending on which ones they inherited, so if they inherited 2 of the recessive A genes, but they got 1 of the dominant B genes and 1 of the recessive B genes, then they could end up with more of a greeny hazel colored eye. So lots of different combinations here based on the fact that we have more than one gene encoding for the same characteristic. Codominance, dominance, and multiple allelism shows up with blood types. And so you probably know what blood type you are, but it'll be based on how these different genes are going to be interacting. So 4 blood types encode for this I gene, which has it builds antigens on the surface of the red blood cells. So there's 3 versions of this. There's the A antigen, the B antigen, or neither one of them. And so the A and the B are actually codominant. So neither one overpowers the other. If either one is there, it is going to be expressed. But the I gene ends up being recessive to the A or the B genes. So what this ends up looking like is you're going to have one of these versions. You're going to have the A version, the B version, or the I version. Note you'd only have 2 of them, not you'd have those 2, or you could have those 2, or you could have the A and the I, or which we're going to refer to as the O one. You're going to have one of those partnerships there, but there are 3 versions of it. And so depending on what the genes of the parents are and how they combine, there's going to be different possibilities. So if we have a type A blood, this could either be because they have 2 of the A versions, or because O is recessive, you could have type A blood and have an O gene. If you're type B, it's the same thing. You either have 2 versions of the B, or you have 1 version of the B and 1 version of the O gene. You could be type AB blood, in which case you have 1 of the A versions and 1 of the B versions, or you could be type O blood, in which case you have both copies of the O gene. And then this is what's going to happen is if you're type A, on your blood cells you have this A protein. If you're type B, you have the B protein. If you're AB, you have both. If you're type O, you have none. And then inside your blood, you have a corresponding opposite antibody for the opposite protein that you have. So if you have type A, then you have these antibodies for type B. If you're type B, then you have the antibodies for type A. If you have type A and B, you've got no antibodies. And if you're type O, you've got both A and B antibodies in your bloodstream. Now, this is important for donating blood because type A antibodies are not good if you mix it with type A blood. Type B would also not be good if they were mixed with type B blood. So what that means is if you are type O blood, then your blood cells there don't have any little proteins on them. So you could take your blood and you could put it into someone of type A blood, or someone type B blood, or someone with type, I think I said A first, AB blood, B blood, or A blood, because your blood cells have no little proteins on the surface there, so no antibodies will interact with it. And this is why we say type O blood is the universal donor, because their blood cells do not have the type A or the type B proteins on the surface. However, type O blood people do carry the antibodies that would react with type A blood or type B blood or type AB blood. So type O blood cannot receive blood from anyone other than other type O's. So type O is a universal donor, but they can only accept blood from other type O people. There's also the Rh factors, I'm just going to quickly mention, but you probably know what your blood type is and whether it is positive or negative. This is another antigen that is present, and the positive is dominant type, and the recessive is negative type for this particular antigen. And so within your blood, you will have one or the other. You'll be positive or you'll be negative. A person without this specific antigen, so if you are Rh negative, then what that means is you can't have Rh positive blood put into your body, because it would essentially you would have a reaction to that blood because you yourself are Rh negative. And what this can cause is if you actually have a mother who is pregnant, but the child has inherited a Rh positive antigen, and if the mother is Rh negative, then if that fetal blood is going to interact with the mother's system, it could be bad. Luckily, we have figured out that there's a particular drug you can take and avoid all of those issues. Multifactorial traits are a particular trait that may be polygenic and controlled by many different genes that spread throughout. And so essentially tracking the inheritance is going to get very complicated. And we may not know where the genes are exactly, or all of the things that will come together to factor into that. So essentially multifactorial means you're not going to be able to track it particularly easily. Something like height, there's going to be many different genes that are going to factor in for height. And so height is not a particular spot on your chromosome that says this is how tall you're going to be. There's going to be many genes that interact in a complicated way that are going to dictate what height you potentially can grow to. All right, nature versus nurture is another important thing. So we're looking at the genetics of this, but that is the nature part of it. But the nurture is the environment, which is also going to be hugely important. So how the cells and the organism, the individual, what they're exposed to as they're growing up is also going to have a big effect on the actual phenotypes of them. So for example, how tall someone is going to be dictated by genetics for sure, complicated multifactorial genetics, but it also is going to be affected by things like nutrition. If you don't eat healthy enough and you're not getting enough nutrients while your body's trying to grow, it's not going to be able to grow as much. So it is not strictly the genes that dictate what is going to happen, but also the environment in which those genes are trying to be expressed. Intelligence is a huge one as well, and so there are many different factors, many different genes that would factor into how your brain is going to function, which then some people would put together as in put a label on it and say, well, that's intelligence. But obviously the environment is going to be very important as well. The situation that brain is in while it is developing, the exposure to being able to take advantage of the possibility to perform in a particular way is also going to be hugely important in determining on the outcome of that growth. All right, let's try some practice problems. So, first one, we've got a cow and it has red fur, and so we're going to use an R for that. It's co-dominant with white fur as well. So, what are the phenotypic and genotypic ratios of the offspring if you breed a red cow with a white bull? And so let's look at this. So a red cow would have red fur, and if it has red fur, we're going to assume that it's homozygous for this red fur, because since this is co-dominant, if it was a heterozygous genotype, then it would have red and white fur. The white fur cow would have the two alleles for white fur, and so I can set up a Punnett square here and we say, okay, this would pass on one of the white fur alleles, this would pass on a white fur allele, that would pass on a white fur allele, and that would pass on a white fur allele. Let's make this into a bit more of a square. The mother would pass on the red fur allele to each of these possible offsprings as well. And remember, we're just drawing 4 because of the amount of alleles we have. It's not that there has to be 4 baby cows born. It's just that if we looked at the ratio here, for all 4 possibilities, in this case, they are all going to be heterozygous for red fur and white fur, and because they are codominant, they will have that roan coloring that we saw on the horses, but they're going to have both red and white fur at the same time. So, next question. What happens if we took one of these roan cows, which would have one gene for red and one gene for white, and we bred it with another roan cow, which also has one gene for red and one gene for white? We can set up the Punnett square here, and so again, the one cow would pass on the red gene, and so would the other cow. In some cases, they would both combine. In this case here, the red gene would be combining with this white gene from the parent. And in this case here, we get the red and the white. And in this case, we get the white and the white. So in that case, we would have one red cow, one white cow, and half of the cows would be roan. And so we would have essentially a 25% of the offspring would be red, 25 would be white, and 50 would be roan. Okay, so we have in this case, a woman's blood type is AB, and she decides to have kids with a man who has type A. So let's look at the mother has type AB blood. The father has type A something. Because remember, if you're type A, you don't know whether you're type A with two alleles that are both for A, or whether you're type AO, because O is recessive, so it wouldn't show up. So this father could be either type AA or type AO, let's say. So let's look at the possibility. We have children that are type A, type AB, and type B. So to figure out the genotype of the father, we have to think, okay, well, this type A here, that child could have been made from the A from the mother, and if it is type A, it could have inherited this A from the father, so that could have been one case, or it could have inherited type A from the mother, and if this is, let me put an O there, if this is, question mark, type O, then it could have also contributed that, in which case this child is the type A child. Let's look at the next possibility. So type AB for the second child. If that is the case, it could have inherited the A from the father and the type B from the mother. The father doesn't have any type B, because if he did have a type B, he would be type AB, but he's just type A. So that could have been a possibility as well. And let's look at the last one. Let's use blue. So this last child, this is that child, this last child has type B blood. And so if we look at the B, that could have been inherited from the mother, but it has to get one of the alleles from the father. So if the father was type AA, then this couldn't be his child. So assuming it is his child, then this genotype for the father could work out to be type AO blood, which you could then pass on to this child, who would be type B blood. So we have type B blood here, type AB, and this then child we'd actually know soon as this individual inherited an A either from the father or the mother, and so it could be type AA or it could be type AO, but this child here lets us know for sure that, assuming this is the father, his genotype is definitely going to be type AO blood. All right, here we have a gray feathered hen. So we have gray feathers hen, and then we have a rooster with gray feathers and a hen with the same phenotype, so it has also got gray feathers. They produce some baby chickens, and those babies, 15 of them have gray feathers, 6 of them have black feathers, and 8 of them have white feathers. So if we look at the possibilities for how you could end up with most of the offspring, 15 end up with the same phenotype. They're going to be gray, but it's about 25%. So if we're thinking that 6 is almost half of 15, and 8's kind of almost half of 15, not exactly, but again, this is just a probability thing. It won't be exact, but it kind of looks like, okay, this is most of them. So we could say about of all of the baby chickens that are born, and what is that? And that's 29 of them. So almost 30 of them. 15 would be about half. So about half of them end up being gray. About a quarter of them end up being black, and about a quarter of them end up having those white feathers. And so if we look at these combinations, we can say, okay, this kind of looks like we've got some blending of those traits. And let's just try this out. If the gray trait came from feathers that were black and it blended with feathers that were white, and that was the genotype of a gray chicken, and it were to breed with another gray chicken, it's the same, it's gray as well, it's the same phenotype. So if that were to be their genotypes, could we explain the outcome we see in their offspring? So if we set up a Punnett square, we can see that in this case, let's fill it out here, PW and then WW. We can see that, okay, well, 1/4 of those chickens will have black feathers. 1/4 of them will have white feathers. And the other half are going to be the gray feathered chickens. So this makes sense. If both of the parents are heterozygous, but the traits blend, then we would see that they're going to end up having gray phenotypes, and that would explain the numerical numbers that we see, so that about half of them are gray, about a quarter of them are black feathered, and about a quarter of them are white feathered in those offspring. What offspring would you expect from the mating of a gray rooster with a black hen? So let's assume that we are blending these traits here. So if we had a gray rooster, you would have both of those alleles. And if it was with a black feathered hen, she would have the 2 black feathered alleles. And if we set up our Punnett squares, we would get these as the genotypes, which would essentially mean that 50% of the offspring are going to have black feathers, and 50% of them are going to be heterozygous and end up with those gray feathers.